expected anything that day. A simple cake, a card, maybe a candle lit with some affection. I didn't want anything fancy, just a gesture that showed I mattered. After all, it was my birthday. But instead, what they placed in my hand was a dry loaf of bread. Literally, a hard French loaf. No candle, no filling, no explanation. I looked at my mom, thinking it was some kind of joke. She was sitting in the living room, phone in hand, scrolling through her feed as if she'd done nothing wrong. My dad wasn't even home. My brother, across the table, looked at me and chuckled. It cut me to the core. "Happy birthday," my mom said, without even looking up. I stood there, holding that bread like it was radioactive. I looked around, expecting someone to say, "Just kidding," or, "Wait, there's more." But no, that was it. I sat in the kitchen chair and stared at the bread like someone facing proof of a painful truth. I wasn't a priority. I never was. Across the room, my mother was talking about the new decoration request she was making for my brother's birthday the following month. "It's going to be special," she'd say. "I want something grand." The contrast overwhelmed me. My brother would have personalized balloons, guests, and a 3-tiered cake. And me? A stale piece of bread in silence. Share this story to reach further. Subscribe to the channel. Share this video on WhatsApp. And leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. I'll be very happy to read each comment. At that moment, the bread stopped being just bread. It became a symbol of everything that was missing. Of everything I never received. Of all the times I screamed inside and no one heard. It wasn't the first time. Since childhood, the differences had always been there. Not in shouting matches, but in small gestures, in the details. When my brother wanted something, he got it before asking. When I needed it, it was a heavy favor, full of conditions. Growing up in that house was like watching a show where I was always the supporting character. I remember one Christmas in particular. I asked for a book, just one. My brother wanted a video game console. He got the console, 2 controllers, and a gaming headset. Me? I got a generic sweatshirt, the wrong size. My mom said she couldn't find the book I wanted, but the sweatshirt was clearly a hasty purchase. That left a deeper impression on me than any missing gift. At school, teachers would ask why I was so withdrawn. I couldn't explain. How could I say I was invisible at home? That being noticed was rare, and when it happened, it was for something I'd done wrong. While my brother was congratulated for getting a C in math, I got an A and heard, "You went above and beyond your call of duty." I began to realize that the more I tried, the less I was noticed. My brother would break glasses and was called a cute klutz. I'd stumble once and be lectured for days. He could make a mistake. I needed to be perfect to even be tolerated. This made me afraid to breathe loudly, afraid to take up space. The dry bread on my birthday wasn't just an oversight. It confirmed a lifetime of me always having too much of the basics, and my brother always felt overly natural about overdoing it. It was their way of saying, "You're not worth that much." When my brother's birthday arrived, the house transformed. It felt like a celebrity was about to arrive. My mother spent weeks organizing everything: balloons, party favors, a personalized playlist. She ordered a 3-tier cake with a mirrored icing, an acrylic topper with his name, and indoor fireworks. Every detail screamed, "He's the center of attention." The morning of the party, I woke to the sound of speakers being tested in the backyard. I walked through the kitchen and saw the table being set with themed cupcakes and decorated glasses. My mom completely ignored me. My dad gave me a curt, "Good morning." I sat in the corner and watched it all, trying to swallow the pain that was growing like a lump in my throat. When the cake arrived, my mother cried with emotion. She took photos, posted stories, hugged the baker. I watched the scene like someone watching a play where everyone has a role, except me. The same space where, days before, they'd given me a dry loaf of bread, now looked like a set for a television commercial. It was ironic. It was cruel. During the party, people came up to congratulate my parents. How beautiful, how thoughtful, and they, smiling, accepted the compliments like trophies. My brother laughed with his friends, eating the luxurious cake, surrounded by attention. And me, sitting in the corner, pretending it didn't hurt, pretending it wasn't a slap in the face. A neighbor came over and said, "And your cake? Was it as beautiful as this one?" I gave an awkward smile and replied, "It was simpler." My eyes welled up, but I swallowed. I swallowed as I had my whole life, because, in that house, showing pain was giving ammunition, and I already knew that if I cried, they'd say I was being dramatic. At that moment, I swore to myself, this story would not repeat itself. I was not going to spend my entire life being treated like an extra. Something had to change, even if I had to go out on my own to build my own stage. After the party, the silence was worse than any noise. It was the kind of silence that screams, that weighs, that scratches inside. My mother was beaming, telling me how much she'd been praised. Everyone was delighted with the cake, she repeated, and I just nodded. It wasn't like she remembered that. A week earlier, she'd given me a loaf of bread for my birthday. My brother continued to be treated like a prince. He received gifts, money, and even heard from my parents. You deserve all of this. I spent the next few days almost invisible, without a gesture, without recognition. The bread was no longer the problem. The problem was everything it symbolized, and I began to silence myself, externally and internally. At school, I stopped trying to be the best. Why? To go home and be ignored? My teachers noticed. You look different, they'd say, but I just smiled. What was I going to say? That my mother erased me? That my brother was treated like he was made of gold? They didn't even know what I'd gotten for my birthday. No one knew. The pain began to turn into fatigue. Waking up was a drag. Sleeping was a relief. I found myself wondering if the problem was me. Was I unlovable? Was I doing something wrong without realizing it? I began to blame myself for not being easy to deal with, as they said, but I just wanted to be seen. That's all. To be remembered without having to scream for attention. I tried to write about what I felt, but I couldn't even do that anymore. Words escaped me. My body felt heavier. I no longer knew what hurt more. The bread, the cake, or the years of forgetting. Everything mixed together. And the cruelest thing was realizing that, to my parents, none of it was serious. To them, I was just overly sensitive. In that silence, I began to erase parts of myself. My desires, my opinions, my brilliance. Everything hidden, everything stored away, as if I needed to fit into some invisible space. But what I didn't know was that this silence was only the beginning of change, because something deep inside, deep down, still pulsed, and that something was about to awaken. There was a day when everything just collapsed inside me. I'd gotten home from school early, tired, a little dizzy from swallowing so much. I walked into the kitchen and saw my mother placing flowers on the table. I thought it was beautiful. For a second I wondered, did she remember me? Was this a gesture of affection? But no. It was for dinner celebrating my brother's achievement. He'd earned a spot in a school sports tournament. Nothing too grand, but enough to spark a celebration. A special dinner, dessert, praise, and me? I'd gotten the highest grade in the class in my essay a few days earlier. I showed her my report card. Do you know what she said? You've always been good at this, haven't you? No hug, no congratulations, just that dry phrase, as if it were an obligation. That night, I ate in my room, not out of pride, out of self-protection. The smell of dinner wafted strongly from the hallway, but my appetite was gone. I sat there, on the edge of the bed, listening to their laughter from across the house. It was like attending a party you weren't invited to, even though you lived in the same house, even though you were their daughter. That's when I stopped waiting. I stopped expecting recognition, affection, or even justice. I felt a strange mix of relief and pain, as if accepting it was less painful than continuing to dream of change. I looked in the mirror and told myself, don't wait anymore. And in that moment, a kind of quiet courage began to blossom. It wasn't a loud courage. It was the kind that grows slowly, in the dark. I started saving money hidden away, working online when I could. I applied for every scholarship, contest, essay. I wanted to leave. I wanted to find a world where I would be treated with a modicum of equality, and maybe, just maybe, with a little love. I began to form my mental escape plan. I knew that leaving any old way wouldn't be smart. I needed a foundation, a strategy, a determination, and to achieve that, I kept studying, even when no one was noticing. I immersed myself in books not out of obligation, but because there I found silence, and more importantly, perspective. While my brother slept late, I woke up before sunrise to review material. He received gifts, I accumulated certificates, and each printed diploma was a stepping stone to my exit. I began gathering everything into a portfolio, a plan B, C, D, all ready. Because plan A, sitting there waiting for affection, had died on the day of dry bread. I grew up without them noticing, more mature, more certain of what I wanted, and also more certain of what I no longer wanted. That home, that dynamic, that life where I was the backdrop to other people's shows. They didn't even notice the change. They didn't even notice when I started to be more on the outside than on the inside. And that, in a painful way, freed me. One night, I received news. I'd been accepted into an academic program in another city, with a full scholarship. I felt like screaming, like celebrating, but no one at home would understand how much it weighed on me, so I kept the news like a precious secret. I only told it to myself, in front of the mirror. I congratulated myself, I hugged myself, and I cried. But this time, it was relief. That morning, I began packing my things. I didn't say anything to anyone. I grabbed my notebook, my simplest clothes, and my hope. I promised myself that this would be the last night I felt invisible under that roof, because from then on, anyone who didn't want to see me would have to watch my absence. The next morning, I drank coffee alone in the kitchen. The smell of fresh coffee was the same as always, but something inside me was completely different. My mother walked past me, said an automatic "good morning," and headed toward my brother's room. I glanced at the table where I'd so often sat waiting for attention. This time, I didn't wait. I just breathed. I ate slowly. Each bite was almost a goodbye. I looked around and realized how that house had so many details that I once thought meant home. The photos on the wall with my brother smiling, the paintings decorated with phrases that were never true inside. All of that no longer belonged to me. I didn't hate that place. I just didn't fit in it anymore. I went back to my room, checked my backpack, and looked at myself in the mirror one last time. I didn't cry. I felt strangely at peace, as if my entire body knew this was the right path. I texted a friend who was going to help me move. She was on her way, and I knew. When I walked through that door, nothing would be the same again. Before I left a note on the table. Simple, to the point. I wrote, "It wasn't the bread, it was everything." I just wanted to be a daughter too. I put my name at the end, not to draw attention, but to remind them that I had a name, that I was someone, and that they'd ignored it for too long. When I closed the door, I didn't feel guilt. I felt freedom. It wasn't escape. It was liberation. It wasn't revenge. It was healing. Because for the first time, I chose to leave before being discarded, and that choice was mine. Mine alone, without needing anyone's permission. On my first day away, I slept at my friend's house. It was a small, noisy room, with a mattress on the floor and thin walls. But there, in that simplicity, I slept peacefully, without walking in silence, without hiding, without hoping for a cake or fearing a dry loaf of bread. I slept, knowing that, even though I was afraid, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. My friend hugged me tightly before bed. "You did what no one else had the courage to do." That made me cry for the first time in days. It wasn't pain, it was relief, because I was finally being recognized not for being useful, but for being brave, for the person I'd become despite everything they'd tried to deny me. Meanwhile, my absence began to make waves at home. My mother sent me a short text. "Did you leave without warning?" I ignored it. Then came a call. I didn't answer. Then came the audio messages, the accusations. "This is immaturity. You're being dramatic. You'll come back when the money runs out." Each sentence was a desperate attempt to regain control of myself. But this time, silence was my ally. I didn't need to answer. I didn't owe them an explanation. And more than that, I didn't want to go back to being that daughter who begged for scraps of affection. If before my voice was ignored, now my silence echoed louder than any words they pretended to hear. My absence became a topic of conversation among neighbors, aunts, and uncles, even in the family group. They labeled me the rebel, the ungrateful, the exaggerated one, and that was fine. Let them create their own versions, because the only one that mattered now was mine, the version where I had finally put myself first. 2 weeks later, I received another message from my mother. This time it wasn't angry. It was almost a confession. "We saw your note. The house feels strange without you." I read it with a heavy heart, but I didn't delude myself, because often, regret comes not from the pain someone caused you, but from the absence of the comfort you silently offered. More messages started pouring in. My father wrote too, something he never did. "Your mother won't stop crying. I don't know what to do." I knew what he meant, even without saying it. They were starting to realize I wasn't just the difficult daughter. I was the balance disguised as silence in that house. And now that I was gone, the emptiness spoke for me. My mom sent me a picture of my brother's cake, now cut. I missed you so much that day. Too late, because what I needed wasn't an invitation to eat the leftovers from a party that was never mine. What I wanted was to be celebrated as a daughter, not a burden. And that, as much as it hurts them now, can't be rebuilt overnight. I replied calmly, I'm fine. I hope you are too. She replied almost immediately, Are you coming back? I read, but I didn't answer, because the real answer wasn't a yes or a no. The answer was the silence that had built up over years. It was the dry bread. It was the 3-tiered cake. It was everything she saw, but never saw. And for the first time, I realized that maybe my mom didn't even know where to begin to make amends. Because while she asked me if I would come back, what I really wanted to hear was, You always deserved the best. But that sentence never came, and maybe it never will. And that's okay, because I don't need her to tell me anymore. I already know. Over time, I began to find my place in the world. The scholarship gave me access to a new campus, full of people who didn't know me as the fated daughter. There, I was just me. And for the first time, that was enough. I didn't have to be perfect or silent. I just needed to be present. And I was whole. I made friends, real friends, who listened to me, who cared, who remembered my birthday without me having to tell them. On my first birthday away from home, I received a simple cupcake, baked in the dorm kitchen. 3 roommates sang happy birthday and hugged me. I cried, because that slightly crooked cupcake was more special than anything I had experienced before. I started writing about my story. I created a blog, a discreet profile, where I talked about favoritism, invisibility, family pain. At first, I thought no one would read it. But within a few days, I started receiving messages from people all over the country saying, You're telling my story. That gave me strength. It made me feel less alone. It made me realize the extent of my healing. My mom found the blog. She texted me, Is this about us? I didn't respond, because it wasn't just about her. It was about thousands of people who, like me, grew up eating emotional crumbs, who never got cake, but swallowed the dry bread of rejection. It was about naming a pain that for a long time I was forced to swallow in silence. And now, no longer. Now, my story had a voice. It had a name. It had strength. And most importantly, it no longer served only to remind me of what I'd missed. It served to show others that it's possible to escape, that it's possible to live a life of your own choosing, even if it begins with a dry piece of bread in your hand. I received a letter from my mother, handwritten. This had never happened before. She began by saying, It took me a while to understand, and maybe I still don't understand everything, but I wanted to try. The words were simple, without embellishments, without any attempts to defend herself. She talked about how it was easier to please my brother because he was demanding, and because she thought I didn't need it. She told me how lost she felt in her own flaws, and that she preferred not to see what I felt because, if she did, she would have to change. And change hurt. She wrote, You were so strong, so mature. I mistook your strength for emotional independence. I thought you didn't need cake, hugs, praise. I read the letter 3 times, and I cried every time. She also spoke about bread day. She said it was carelessness, fatigue, routine. But she admitted, even if I had remembered, I probably wouldn't have done it differently. And that's the worst thing to admit. I didn't ask for this letter. I didn't expect it. But there, I read for the first time what I'd always dreamed of hearing. It wasn't my fault. I wasn't the problem. She ended the letter with a phrase that echoed in my head for days. If you ever let me, I want to start from scratch. Not even as your mother, but as someone willing to learn to truly love you. That broke me, because for the first time, she didn't ask me to come back. She asked to become worthy of being a part of my life. It took me days to respond. I wrote back, I don't know if it's possible to start over, but it's possible to move forward in a different way. And that response, for me, was the greatest piece I could offer. Unhurried, without erasing what was, but with openness to what could still be, if she were truly willing to try. Seeing my mother in person again was unlike anything I'd imagined. We met at a cafe downtown. I arrived early, as always. She walked in slowly, her face older, her eyes tired, but also softer. She sat across from me and simply said, Thank you for coming. For the first time, I saw no judgment in her eyes. I saw listening. The conversation was slow. We said little, but every word felt important. She told me she'd read every post on the blog, and that each one was a blow she deserved. She said she cried alone, embarrassed. She'd started looking at old photos and noticing how my smile had faded over the years. And there, finally, she saw it. I listened to everything without interrupting. I didn't say much either, but when I did speak, I was honest. I said it still hurt, that I didn't know if it would ever stop, that I was learning to love myself after years of feeling like I had to earn love, and that he still didn't trust her, but he wasn't angry anymore. And that, for me, was a start. She didn't ask for forgiveness, and I didn't offer to forget, but I left with something I'd never had: respect. And that alone was enormous, not for her, for me, because I needed to listen to myself too, and realize that even after everything, I was capable of moving forward with a peaceful heart, without carrying the weight of what I hadn't received. I returned home, to my corner, to my new world. And for the first time, I looked in the mirror and said, "You are enough," not because someone told me, but because I finally believed it. I wasn't what they didn't give me. I was what I chose to give myself. While my mother tried to get closer, my brother remained distant. He didn't speak to me, didn't text, didn't say anything. Until one day, I received an unexpected call from him. His voice was low, without arrogance. "I know you hate me." I took a deep breath. It wasn't hate, it was hurt. And a hurt so deep it couldn't even be expressed in simple words. He started talking. He said he always knew he was the favorite, and that deep down, he took advantage of that he never defended me because he was afraid of losing his privileges. He confessed that the party, the cake, the gifts, all of it had a bitter taste for him when he saw my blank look. But he never had the courage to say anything. I listened in silence. He cried on the other side. "I feel like crap," he said. "I wish I could go back in time." But I knew, you can't go back. The damage was done. I could no longer be the forgotten sister, the shadow watching from afar. I told him, "I don't want you to go back in time. I want you to be different from now on." And he, for the first time, agreed without irony. "I'll try." It was strange. I'd grown up seeing my brother as the untouchable prince. Now he seemed small, human, vulnerable. Maybe it was the first time I'd truly seen who he was, beyond the pedestal my parents had placed him on. He hadn't shied away from responsibility for what he'd done, but by admitting it, he'd opened a window for me to breathe easier. I disconnected the call with tears in my eyes. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. And in that moment, I realized my brother wasn't just my tormentor. He was also a hostage to the dynamics that tore us apart. And perhaps, in a twisted way, I too had been shaped by the same hands that had hurt me. A few months later, I visited the house where I grew up again, not as a daughter begging for affection, but as someone who knew who he was. I entered slowly, looking at the walls, the photos, the furniture. Everything seemed smaller, less threatening. It was no longer the prison that had once suffocated me. It was just a house, an old set, the stage where I learned to stand up. My mother greeted me at the door. My father was in the living room. My brother came downstairs. The atmosphere was no longer one of spectacle. It was one of caution, of tentativeness. We all sat together for the first time in years. There were no accusations. There were no excuses. Just silence and a few timid phrases. But there, in that moment, the silence didn't hurt. It was space. It was respect. I looked at the table and remembered the dry bread. I remembered the 3-tiered cake, and I realized it no longer hurt the same way. It was like a scar, still visible, still part of my history, but no longer open, no longer bleeding. I smiled slightly, not because I had forgotten, but because I had survived, and that made me greater than all of it. Before leaving, my mother called me into the kitchen. She placed a small cake she'd made in my hand, simple, with barely spread frosting. "It doesn't erase the past," she said, "but it's a way of saying I want to try." I looked at that cake and understood. It wasn't about the sweetness. It was about the intention, about the change, about the chance to finally be remembered. I left that house weightless. For the first time, I didn't carry the feeling of being forgotten. I carried only my own choice, to carry on lightly. Not for them, but for myself. Because in the end, I wasn't the dry bread. I was the hunger to be seen. And finally, I saw myself. Today, when I think about everything I've experienced, I no longer feel the same sharp pain. I still remember the dry bread, of course. I still remember the 3-tiered cake, but these symbols no longer carry the weight they once did. Now, they're just milestones, points on a line that brought me here, a story of pain that I transformed into strength, an absence that became presence, my own. I didn't need expensive gifts. I didn't need elaborate parties. What I always needed was something that should be basic: love, recognition, belonging. For years, I believed the problem was me, that I wasn't enough. But today I know, the insufficiency was never mine. It was theirs. And carrying that burden wasn't fair to me. I transformed my silence into words, my pain into voice, my dry bread into stories that touch other hearts. And that for me is the victory no one can erase. Because in the end, I am not what they did to me. I am what I decided to do with what they did to me. And I decided to live. I decided to be whole. I decided to own myself. My family still exists. It's not perfect. It never will be. But now I exist within it in a different way. Not as a shadow, not as a supporting character, but as someone who chose their place. And even if they didn't know how to give me a piece of the pie in the past, today I know I don't need to expect crumbs from anyone to feel worthy. If I could speak to that girl who received a dry loaf of bread on her birthday, I would say, calm down. You will grow. You will find yourself. And one day, you will laugh at this pain, because you will realize it was never about you. It was always about them. And you, despite everything, were always enough. And this is what I leave you listening to. Never accept being given less just because they say you're strong. You deserve cake. You deserve a party. You deserve love. You always have. If this story moved you, I want to ask you a favor with an open heart. Share this video now, on WhatsApp, in a family group, with a friend, with someone you know who's felt forgotten. Sometimes, a simple story can open eyes, heal wounds, and give courage to someone who is about to give up. Say and subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Here you'll find real, intense stories that aren't afraid to show pain, but also demonstrate resilience. Each subscription helps this content reach more people who need to hear it, and you'll be part of this chain of transformation. Please leave your comment as well. Tell me where you're watching from, which city, which country. I read them all, every word, and every comment shows me how connected we are, even from so far away. It could be a sentence, it could be just an I understand you. Everything matters, because your voice matters. And never forget this, you don't have to accept life's dry bread as if it were the most you can receive. You don't have to settle for crumbs. You were born to be celebrated, to be loved, to be recognized. If no one does it for you, do it yourself. Choose yourself. Love yourself, because you are enough. Always have been. Always will be.